that my heart has started again. Keep going.
Well, and so during our conversations and being with the band and talking about the era, because of course I was born in 58, so this was kind of before my time, but wanting to understand the era, and I grew up with the music because I have older sisters. And he looked at me and he said, well, you know the whole plane crash site was staged. And I said, no, I don't know anything about it. I said I knew he died in a plane crash, but I knew nothing about the Big Bopper. I knew nothing about, Richie Valens. I knew nothing about any of that. And he said it's actually a picture of another same exact airplane that was purposely crashed into a field. And everything else was staged. And that's what he told me.
Did he have any theory as to what actually happened?
There supposedly he didn't say what happened on the plane, but he said, and I don't know any of this for fact. Okay, I'm just going off of what they told me. And he said that there was a and you guys might even be able to verify this. There was a conflict. They were supposed to be going from this one concert overnight to the next concert, and there was already a conflict going on about who was being paid what, and something about the promoters were getting the majority of the take of these contracts, and the guys who were supposed to be performing were getting almost zero. And so
that's pretty normal.
Yeah, but what was going to happen is when they got to where they were supposed to go, all of the musicians were going to bail. They weren't going to perform that second night. And somebody found out about it and started threatening them. And apparently there was an argument that went on backstage during the show the previous night. And that's where everything started, and that's where everything kind of escalated. And threats were made back and forth, and they were saying, we're not going to do it, we're not going to do it, we're leaving, all that kind of stuff. And they were kind of bound to each other, but they had, as a group, decided that when they got to the next stop, and I don't even remember where the next stop was, it was Nebraska or something, that they were all going to bail. And they had people waiting at the next stop to pick them all up. That's what I was told.
Gary, have you heard anything like that?
No. I know that I have talked to Tommy Alsop, who was the guitar player on that tour, buddy, and Carl Brunch, who was the drummer, which I guess you would say are the last two survivors of the Winter Dance Party that actually was there. I know that on the bus it was 45 below zero, and they would burn papers in the aisle, and they would fill the bus up with smoke, and they have to roll the bus windows down. I know that they weren't able to get their clothes cleaned, and I know that's why Buddy rented a plane. And I think it was only like $20 for each one of them. And I know that Waylon Jennings gave the Big Bopper his seat, and the Big Bopper gave Waylon a sleeping bag that his wife had just bought him. And I know that when the plane crashed, there were candy wrappers around the plane, so people thought that, look, they're drug addicts, they're eating candy. Well, there were no Waffle Houses in 1959, and when you played, you ate what you were hungry. You carried it on. So there were a lot of myths about it, like the gunshot in the back of the seat. But then they found Buddy Holly's gun under the plane. It had been fired twice. And Buddy Holly was always paid in cash. So he took his briefcase, and he took his gun. So when he left that night, he was paid. And, so I know that part of it is pretty well true as far as him having the money. I also heard that Tommy Alsop and that Carl Bunch were not paid at all for doing the Winter Dance Party. When they got back, they didn't get a penny. So that part of the story is that some people did not get paid. So, I mean, that would be a travesty. Now, I did talk to Carl Bunch. He's since passed away. But, that's one of the great legends, as long as the legend of flipping the coin with Richie Valens. But what you got to remember is Richie Valens has something in common with two other artists. They were with Delphi Records with Bob Keane. those three artists at that label were Richie Valens, Sam Cooke, and Bobby Fuller. Do you know what they all have in common? They all died tragic early deaths, and they were life insurance policies. And Bob King was actually investigated by the FBI because they thought he had taken out these life insurance policies and made himself rich by being involved in a plane crash with Richie Valens, the strange death of Sam Cooke in that motel in Los Angeles, and Bobby Fuller, who they still haven't found who murdered him. Listen, you can't drink gasoline and kill yourself. And you don't badly beat yourself up as a guitar player and break your left index finger and have your body found in your mother's car. I mean, that's not true. And in Hollywood, they put down that it was drug overdose. So, you know, you can't drink gasoline because you throw it up. That's just how it is. You regurgitate it. So, you know, even that, if you take a look at Delphi Records, yeah, you know, there was some money there. But I'm not saying there was. I'm saying that, you know, it's a heck of a coincidence, right?
So as the one here that's like, holy moly, I started to say another word, but moly I injected it quickly. This is some crazy stuff. The craziest part, of course, is Zeta dated this guy. I stopped listening to everything else after that. I was still fascinated by that.
I actually had a date.
Well, that's not the fact you had a date. I mean, we also, that brings a whole nother macabre conversation, Gary, that we had with Zeta about dating. But that's,
okay.
That's another, we'll burn a candle for that one. But, okay, so now, you know, the crime scene, Andy, is all, like, revved up here because you're talking, what you're basically saying is that there's a possibility that some of the greatest artists of the past 50 years have been pretty much bumped off early because their producers or the people that own the record companies or whatever thought they had more value dead than alive. Did I just hear that sort of? Is that kind of what's happening here?
Kind of what's happening. Jimi Hendrix said, it's funny how people love the dead. Once you're dead, you're made for life. Well, it's not you. It's the people who own the royalties. Now, you know, this is strange coincidences that goes along with it. But, you know, the more you look into it, the more you say, you know, this just doesn't really stand up to a good investigation. So the thing with Hendrix, I was surprised that it just lay there so many years. And I always had that idea of where the wine came from. Why wasn't it in his bloodstream? Why wasn't his alcohol level sky high? You know, but obviously he was dead before it was there. The story goes from one of his roadies who heard it from the manager, said that he had three men go in with large bottles of red wine, and they held Hendrix down, opened his mouth, and drowned him in the wine after giving him the sleeping pills.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. So, you know, who knows? But, you know, the purpose of rock and roll, the purpose of great literature is always to provide something for somebody to read, to be inspired, and to carry on. So maybe that's what we're doing. Carry on.
Gary, here's the even crazier part is that you've had to, I mean, people just don't volunteer this information. So you've had to be Sherlock Gary here in order to come up with this. So I want to reconstruct the way you reconstructed it, okay? Because I know some of this because I've heard it, but it really makes a really good story. Okay, so how did you connect the dots, and who helped you connect these dots? Because this isn't public knowledge. This is sort of the untold National Enquirer version of Jimi Hendrix. For you to even it is, right? So for you to have this as an investigative journalist, what was it? Kind of reconstruct if you can. You may not remember all the steps, but how you got onto this and how you pieced all this together, because this makes kind of an entertaining story. Not as entertaining as Zeta dating this guy, but pretty entertaining anyway. So who first planted this idea in your head, and how did you how did you roll from there?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I noticed how the story changed. Monica Damon's story. What time she fixed him a tuna fish sandwich. Well, Jimi Hendrix hated tuna fish. So Monica Damon says, well, I only had 2 bites. I fixed him a sandwich at 7 o'clock. So if you go to the coroner's report, they said Hendrix had to be dead no later than 4 a.m. That's 3 hours. Now, why would the story change? Why wasn't she there when the ambulance came? Why didn't she go to the hospital? Why was she with Eric Burden, who claims that he was with her, and then they went to the hospital, that no one was even at the apartment when the ambulance and police came? So that story changed. How do you change a story like that? And then going to the party with Devon Wilson and having Monica Damon yelling up at him, making him leave, and that he was upset. I mean, she said he was engaged to her, but nobody else knew that. So you have that story has changed. And then you have the book Rock Roadie, where the road crew member said that Mike Jeffrey had told him that he had murdered Hendrix. And you knew about the life insurance policy and how Eric Burden had almost blown it on television. I mean, that's a pretty common story there. And then probably getting into the toxicology reports, actually looking at what the doctors found. So what you do, you take one piece, you add another piece to it, you find something that's questionable, and then you start exploring, and that's how you find it.
Yeah, but not everybody's just going to, I mean, it's one thing when you're talking about Billy Bob that lives down the street, he's a mechanic at the Shell station, or whatever. It's another one when you're talking about musicians associated with arguably the greatest guitarist ever lived. I think you could build a case that he's certainly in that short list for that. So how do you connect with these people? I mean, I know you kind of have these connections now, but when you're just like a young sprout, how do you connect with these people and, get them to talk to you? That's also kind of a fascinating story.
Well, the young sprout, you don't, because you got to have some books out. But since then, I've known some people who were close to Hendrix. I know Billy Cox, who was the bass player who was with him when he died. And all these stories were told. Jamal Sultan, who was a percussionist with him, he told me a number of great stories about it. So a number of people who were with Hendrix, I'd met Mitch Mitchell, and they had concerns about the story. So they talked to me about it. So I would hear that, and then what I wanted to do was get more information and put it together. And of course, with Mike Jeffrey, he was killed in a plane crash. So there's nobody to say who did anything. I mean, who do you punish? But it makes an open-ended story. And to me, it just seems like murder had to be the natural answer.
And so are there odd circumstances around his plane crash?
Well, it's kind of odd. Mike Jeffrey used to work in the same division that James Bond's in fiction, with military intelligence. And he was a demolition expert. And he was a demolition expert. So a lot of people who knew him claimed that Mike Jeffrey probably could have had the plane blown up and put himself on the roster and then escape everything with as much money as he could carry. Now, even though that sounds far-fetched, this story is just incredible, and how twisted it is. And then
so I got to stop you. I got to stop you so that people can keep track of this. So what you're saying, if I'm understanding it, is that his manager had mob connections and was in debt to them because he wanted to open up a studio and he needed money. Jimi Hendrix, his cash cow, wanted to go someplace else, so he would lose all the associated royalties with Jimi Hendrix moving forward, plus he'd still be alive, and he had a $2 million life insurance policy. So in theory, this man may have had Jimi Hendrix murdered and had it made to look like a suicide, and then later, because he's a demolitions expert from British